All right, Moser in for Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, brought to you today by your Delaware Valley Acura dealers. This month, visit your local dealer for great deals on the award-winning Acura lineup. Geoff Mosher, and we got a ton of stuff to get into. I don't know that we're going to hit them all today. We'll try our best to get through them as fast as possible on today's edition of Football at 4, again, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, as we're getting into training camp Inside the Birds podcast here in a week or so. We hope, anyway. We'll get some information on that from the latest NFLPA call. But first, let's bring in Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds. What's up, Mosh?
Hey, fellas. How you doing?
All is well. Man, we are. It's hard to believe with all this no sports for so long. I feel like football is almost getting lost in the sauce a little bit. Like, normally, we're ready for training camp and, like, preseason game. We're, like, so juiced up just to see a preseason game. I don't even care that there's no preseason games this year because August is so filled up with other stuff. So it seems like football is a little on the back burner. However, it looks like there will be no preseason games from the call last night, that there will be a longer ramp-up period in camp, that the roster sizes will be at 80, which has been talked about, and they've agreed, or they have a general agreement, maybe you can go a little deeper on this, voluntary high-risk opt-out and a general agreement on a stipend if games are lost. That seems like where we are, but it feels like the NFL and the players have quickly got on a page together to get training camp up and going next week.
Yes, and I felt they needed to do that. I think we spoke about that last time I was on, that these coaches in particular, head coaches and position coaches, they've got to be able to have their plan in place for what they're going to be doing for the next 6 weeks or so before the season starts. And the longer these talks dragged on and the more uncertainty there was about the kind of schedule that they're facing, the more difficult it is to be prepared. And so it's interesting you brought up that basketball is about to come back, baseball is about to come back, hockey, and that's good because it pushes football a little bit to the back burner. That's kind of a good thing too, because even if training camp starts next, I think Thursday, as it's supposed to start on the 28th, as it sure seems, the first 2 or 3 weeks, or who knows when they finally come up with a number, are going to be a lot of just strength training. It's not going to be the kind of stuff that we're used to for the first few weeks of camp, which tend to be exciting, right? We get excited for those, maybe like the 4th or 5th practice when the pads come out, and we get excited about the one-on-ones between the linemen and the offensive linemen and defensive linemen, and the same with the receivers versus the cornerbacks. And I think it's probably going to be a good 2 weeks, maybe even 3, before we really start to get some fun information, if you will, coming out of camp as far as those kind of things go.
All right, Geoff, let's look into camp a little bit here because all the rookies are signed. All right, everybody signed, sealed, delivered to the NovaCare Center. But what are their roles? I mean, let's kind of get a little bit of an insight and preview on what some of the roles of these guys will be. Let's start at the top. Jalen Rhaegar signed a couple days ago. What kind of role do you see for Jalen?
Well, I think it's important to reemphasize what we've said for quite a while about the rookies, is that they all may have roles in mind, but the lack of OTAs, the lack of mini camps, and of course this altered version of training camp is going to make it very difficult for any rookie to kind of walk in there and assume a very commanding role in either the offense or defense. That being said, with a guy like Rhaegar, Doug Peterson said that Jalen Rhaegar will start off at the Z position, which is Deshaun Jackson's position. So he'll kind of start off as the backup to Deshaun. It's an easier position for a wide receiver to get acclimated to because when you're Z, you're off the line of scrimmage. You don't see as much press coverage. And obviously coming from college where you didn't see a lot of that, he'll have to adjust to it. But if he is a fast study, I know that they want to get him, Jalen, as the ball in his hands in a lot of different ways. They'd love to be able to play him at the X. They'd love to be able to move him into the slot and just do a whole lot of creative things to take advantage of his explosion. But he obviously first has to prove that he can master the Z first before they do that.
What about Jalen Hurts? Obviously a very controversial pick, but I think we're all sort of intrigued by the packages that Doug Peterson can put into play. But now, what can we expect out of him?
It's a great question. If anything, the whole gadget idea of Jalen Hurts might be more reasonable and theoretical or faster seen than him quarterbacking, because he's going to be so far behind when a rookie quarterback, of all the positions, you want your rookie quarterback to have the most snaps, a lot of reps, a lot of time in the spring to gel with the coaches and the teammates, and Jalen will have none of that. So to me, and we've said this a lot, I mean, when the Eagles start their season, Nate Sudfeld's the backup quarterback. There's no question about it. And we'll see if the Eagles even try to add a veteran like they did last year when they brought in Josh McCown late. So right now, Jalen Hurts is going to have to try to bridge that gap in learning the quarterback position. And in the meantime, maybe they have the opportunity to throw him on the field in some gadget ways. Although I would think that Doug wants to get him up to speed at quarterback as much as he's getting him up to speed as far as offensive weapon.
Jeff, another interesting guy is Davion Taylor because he was the third pick, and a lot of people don't know much about him, don't know what to think. They're not including him, I believe, over at Inside the Birds. You guys, talked about the linebacking core, and people are like, who are these guys? This is a third-round pick, Davion Taylor, Colorado. What's his role? Should we, be giving him more credit?
No, I don't think so. I mean, he's a third-round pick, but just because someone's picked in a certain round doesn't mean they're going to live up to that. And sometimes you pick a guy in the third round where you're, again, with all picks, you're trying to look 2 or 3 years down the road. And that's certainly the case with Davion, who's got athleticism everywhere. I mean, he's got just traits out the rear end. But as far as his experience playing the position, specifically like a stacked linebacker, on the line of scrimmage or close to the line of scrimmage, he doesn't have that much experience with it. And this is, a lot of learning is going to have to be done with this Eagles defense. So, I mean, I think special teams mostly is where that athleticism can help. And if he can, pick up, be a fast study, maybe you can see him in some sub packages. But I think that one's an uphill battle for him. There are some guys who are drafted in third and fourth, like Kevon Wallace we'll talk about. He's played at Clemson. He's been a safety or a defensive back for most of his career. He's played in huge games. I could see Kevon Wallace adjusting into the defense pretty quickly, even without all the camps and everything like that, just based on how long he's played the position and the school he comes from and the level of play he's accustomed to. I could see him adjusting and acclimating a little bit faster than Davion Taylor.
Do you think that the expectations are too high for Wallace? Because a lot of people do make the comparison of Dawkins, and there is a lot of juice surrounding him. It is a big, big difference in college to the NFL. So do you think that the expectations should maybe be lowered a little bit, or it's reasonable to think highly of him?
Well, that's a good question, Hunter. A little bit of both. I mean, when I asked around the league, certain scouts and personnel people that I trust about him, they felt that the Eagles did a nice job getting him there in the fourth round. They felt like that was good value, that this is a kid who, for all the reasons I just mentioned, could, if he's not going to be a star in the NFL, but he's at least going to acclimate and acquit himself well. So if your expectations are that that the starting safeties are Rodney McLeod and probably Will Parks, but that that the Eagles play more than two safeties, and you're hoping that Kevon Wallace can, start off on special teams and maybe by mid-season maybe get into that third safety spot where he's doing a little bit of interior coverage. If that's your expectation, I think that's fair and reasonable. If you're expecting him to play like Brian Dawkins right out of the gate, well then yes, I would say that's unreasonable and remind people that even Brian Dawkins did not play like Brian Dawkins, as we know, right out of the gate.
Look at the rookie roles for the Eagles as training camp set to open up in about a week or so. And a lot of interesting guys who, you might have forgot about when they got drafted in April. Another one's Jack Driscoll. And he's interesting because he seemingly would have been in the market to be the starting right guard until Jason Peters signed. So now Jack Driscoll, what kind of role do you see for the fourth-round pick?
Yeah, he's like a lot of offensive linemen who come into the league. They need to get bigger and stronger. I mean, you could say that for everybody, but specifically offensive linemen. But he is a good move type of lineman. He played at Auburn, which, the Malzahn offense, a lot of movement, a lot of RPOs, a lot of zone blocking. So he's really this offensive scheme will not be strange for him. And in some ways it'll capitalize on his strengths, getting out into the second level, in whether it's a screen or maybe in the run game or even but in pass blocking, I think he'll probably struggle a little bit, have to really get his anchor going, especially when he faces those big, really bruising, nasty defensive linemen. That'll probably be an area where he needs to bridge the gap. But that's kind of typical of young offensive linemen. I think he he's the type of guy that I don't know that he would have started right guard if they didn't sign Jason Peters. I think Matt Pryor still would have had a very big lead over him. But you don't discount these guys. But again, not having any camps is going to hurt his ability to be able to put that strength on and measure him against the defensive linemen.
All right, now we get into the later rounds here, 5th, 6th, 7th, where there's a bunch of guys where they're going to be really altered by the 80-man roster, the no preseason games, the lack of minicamp. So let's talk about guys. Let's lump in John Hightower and Quez Watkins together. These are 2 wide receivers, and we're looking at what their roles might be. Are they even locks to make the team, both of these guys? Are they in competition with each other? I find those 2 guys to be kind of interesting.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't call any of them locks to make the team. I think that you would give them a little leg up because they're draft picks and because they fit that speed mold that Howie Roseman and the personnel staff was really looking to upgrade this offseason. I think Hightower is a guy that, because he can give you some help on special teams in the return game, may have an advantage over Watkins, for example. But I know you'll hear, like, you can't cut this guy because a Hightower would have been a 4th-round pick in some other years, and then he's going to get claimed by another team if you cut him and try to stash him on your practice squad. But I can guarantee you, and I say this every year, every team has guys, low-round draft picks in their camp that they're impressed by, and they're not just going to get rid of their own to get another guy. So I wouldn't worry about the idea that if you cut them and try to re-sign them to your practice squad, you're going to lose them to the waiver wire.
Sean Bradley was drafted in the 6th round. Where do you think his game is at compared to Davion Taylor, who was drafted in the 3rd?
Yeah, it's funny. It's almost like they're opposites in that Davion Taylor doesn't have as much experience, but he has, like I said, so much athleticism, such great traits, whereas Sean Bradley is not the most athletic linebacker you'll ever see, but he played at a high level because he has great instincts. He's smart. I mean, he's one of those, like, the coaches will always sing his praises. And maybe that gives him a little bit more of an advantage as you look at this Eagles linebacker group and you say, well, I mean, who does he have to beat out? He's got to beat out, to play an outside position. He'd have to beat out Nate Gary, which is unlikely, or Duke Riley, which is probably unlikely. But, I mean, who knows? Duke Riley has a lot to prove himself. Again, Davion Taylor, who's going to have to learn a whole lot, and I'm missing another outside linebacker there who I'm neglecting to mention. But the point is, it's not like Sean Bradley has a real uphill. It's not the competition that's standing in Sean Bradley's way. It's how well he plays, how well he adjusts to NFL life without all these camps is what really stands more in the way.
And the linebacker spot, too, as we talk about, seemingly wide open, but we know they like Nate Geary. I mean, so it seems like he makes the team. You would think that TJ Edwards makes the team. So I don't know how many guys they keep at that position. You're not going to cut your 3rd-round pick, Davion Taylor. So there's 3 guys there that seemingly make the team. How many linebackers do you keep? And that seems like if you're like Dante Olson or Sean Bradley, a 6th-round pick, a non-drafted guy, guys that you might like, you might be squeezed out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, of all Adam Kaplan and I went through all the positions on the Inside the Birds podcast that's going to drop tomorrow and tried to figure out who's more vulnerable to being part of the cut down to 80. And we just skipped over linebacker because even though there are guys that may not be great overall talents, they only have 8 linebackers. So I don't know how you get through, a month and a half of practicing and having, multiple packages and, a 1st, 2nd, and 3rd team with just 7 or 8 linebackers. So, the idea that I can't imagine them shaving off any talent right now at linebacker.
All right, let's look at the 6th-round pick, Prince Tengo Wanongo. He was a guy some people thought could have been a higher pick, another Auburn lineman. He's interesting now, too, because Pryor went from starting right guard to kind of swing tackle. You have Jordan Mailata. So this interesting prospect, does he kind of get lost in the sauce with no preseason and a roster cut down?
Yeah, and he's very unlikely to make the 53-man. I mean, will he survive the roster cut down to 80? Probably. I think the positions that you really don't want to mess with too much when you're slimming down the roster is the defensive line and the offensive line. It's hot. You need to rotate as much as possible. You need. You have a pass rushing line, you have a run stopping line. So you need a decent amount of linemen. And when we were doing our who's vulnerable podcast today, that'll drop tomorrow morning, we kind of took it easy on the offensive and defensive line because I think the team just wants to keep as many of those as possible. So I would expect Prince Tega to avoid the cut down to 80. I mean, you never know, but again, his prospect of making the 53, not good. I mean, I think he's a guy that they envision making hopefully being able to put on the practice squad.
Well, it's real quick on him. I mean, you wonder where Mailata's development is. Is he a shoe-in? Do they give up on him? You know what I mean? Like, is that something that comes into play here?
Well, I mean, you normally keep like 8 or 9 offensive linemen, and so you've got your starting 5. You've got to think of Pryor as one. I definitely believe they have Mailata penciled in there as another. That would give you 7. Now, if Mailata gets hurt or really stinks, it opens up the door. But again, they drafted Driscoll, so that's a guy. Nate Herbig made the team last year, and they like him as a backup center, so he's another guy. So now I'm already at that 8 or 9 train. Sua Opeta was on the team last year. I think they promoted him from the practice squad toward the end of the year. They like him. So I just don't see them really, a 6th-round offensive tackle unless he is really, really good. And a lot of the guys I just mentioned are not, or get hurt.
Where does Casey Toohill stand? Defensive end from Stanford. And you know how much they value this position.
Well, they value it. Unfortunately, there's 9 of them right now, all competing for 4 or 5 spots. So, and a lot of the guys at defensive end are pretty entrenched as far as, I mean, we know Brandon Graham, Derek Barnett are 2. I still think there's a chance that they might add Vinny Curry or a different veteran defensive end to make that 3. But then there's Josh Sweat, who's a 4th-round pick. There's Chenard Avery, who they traded a 4th-round pick for. There's Sharif Miller, who they used a 4th-round pick on. So that's, I'm up to 6 defensive ends right there. And then, of course, Joe Osman will get a shot. They had him in mind last year to make the team. He's coming back from an ACL. So, again, Casey might be one who has to worry about the cut down to 80. But even if he makes that, the idea of him making the team, very, very uphill climb.
All right. There's some rookie roles for you. Good stuff, Jeff. And don't forget the Inside the Birds podcast. They'll have more coming. That drops tomorrow. Geoff Mosher, Football at 4. This week's Buzz debate over at InsideTheBirds.com. It's a good one, and it kind of started with our conversation from John Clayton, who mentioned Jadeveon Clowney, which a lot of people started to kind of insinuate that the Eagles are the favorites here. No, not really. But should the Eagles just go all in and say, you know what? 1 year, Clowney, let's do it.
Yeah, and it's a good question, and it has come up a lot on the Inside the Birds Facebook group. And it's funny; it's a polarizing question, and I'm not sure there's a right or a wrong answer to this because he's the type of player that if he stays healthy and plays 16 games, I mean, he's definitely a game changer, and he can put you over the top and make you a Super Bowl. If you're already a Super Bowl contender team, he can just make you even more so. But, the Eagles are in a really tough cap situation that we've talked about beyond this year. They've got $20 million or so that they can roll over next year to help them. Do you just go spend 18 of that 20 that you can roll over to next year on Jadeveon Clowney? I don't know. That's a lot of money for a guy who doesn't always stay healthy. And, you just wonder if he's going to come in and make that much of a difference. Now, if you can get him at a bargain, right? If his number comes down to 9, 10, or 11, and then you can build incentives in there if he stays healthy, but game-by-game bonuses to get to the 15, 16, 17 area, then it's well worth it because at least he made that money by staying healthy and being productive. I'm never against turning down a really good bargain. That's how they got Alshon Jeffrey in 2017, I think at a base of $9.5 million with incentives to 14, and then they wound up signing him to an extension in the middle of the year. But I don't think it would be a smart move to just write him a 1 year, $19 or $20 million check and say, here you go.
Devontae Freeman, still a free agent. His player rep says that his client would like to find a new team in the immediate future. Do you think the Birds are still in play?
Boy, that's shocking. Devontae Freeman wants to find a job in the immediate future. Ooh, good thing he has a player rep to let everybody know that. Sorry, I make fun of Devontae because his saga is pretty interesting. I mean, you look around the landscape of the NFL and you see that most teams go with young running backs, and he's not old, but he's obviously had a lot of injuries and he has not been as productive as he was a few years ago when he was in the Super Bowl. and he wants to be a starter. And I look around and say, well, who needs Devontae Freeman to be their starter right now? A lot of teams have running backs this far along. So I wonder what his price is. It obviously has to come down for him to get a job. But as far as the Eagles are concerned, and Adam Kaplan's reported this a lot, the Eagles are not trying to spend a whole lot of money on another running back because they have Miles Sanders, maybe $1 million to $1.5 million. And I just don't know if Devontae Freeman's gonna take that. So I don't know if that'll ever be a marriage between Devontae and the Eagles unless Devontae's playing time and financial demands are changed.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's almost like if he doesn't get a job or the offer, does he then say, I want to play where I'm going to have a decent role or the team is good? I mean, I guess that's something to kind of keep an eye on with him moving forward, right? I mean, hey, who's got the best role for me at this point?
Yeah, I mean, he's not Le'Veon Bell, though, so I don't know how much of a, is he willing to sit out like 5 or 6 weeks of the season and see if there's a lot of injuries at running back and then see if someone comes knocking down his door with a really fat paycheck? I just don't see that happening. So I think it's in his best interest to just get with the team, get in camp, and try to prove that he's the Devontae Freeman of a few years ago. And if he does and gets that type of workload this coming year and stays healthy, then he can hit the free agent market next year and cash in.
All right, Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast. It drops tomorrow. And, of course, the guys do a great job over at Inside the Birds. Great to partner up with them during Football at 4 tomorrow. It is Adam Kaplan. Friday, it is Andrew DeCecco. And, by the way, the NFL did announce, if there will be fans in attendance this year, you will need to wear masks to games. So even if you go to a game, you're going to have to wear a mask, which I would imagine teams would take the opportunity to even hand them out with their logo on them at the game. So it shouldn't be that big of a deal. I mean, I was at Hershey Park yesterday, Moshe, and everybody had them on. I mean, it was just, it's almost like second nature in some places where people just had them on. I would almost see if you're a team, you would take advantage of this and almost hand them out at the door and say, here's your mask for the game today, right?
I'm surprised that they already haven't just started advertising for masks on their website. Maybe they have.
A lot of them do.
Looked,
you can buy them, I guess buy masks from team sites, but you would almost think, hand them out and make sure they have Eagles logos on them so that everybody has an Eagles logoed one on in the stadium if they're going to go.
Yeah, I think that would look pretty cool. Eagles fans are notorious for being passionate. Like Raiders fans with the black hole type masks would look pretty cool, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think if that make it where hey, you're coming into our place. We all got these masks on. They're all Eagles logos. Try to do something fun with it. But we'll see if Philadelphia even has any fans at this point. No, New Jersey, none. I know a lot of places are making announcements as the day goes on. But training camp, July 28th. Will it open on time? It looks like we're getting closer. More at 97.3 ESPN.com and the Inside the Birds podcast. Moshe, thanks, man.
You got it. Have a great day, guys.
And he, like August, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.